Hello, everybody. It's 1 o'clock, and I'm live again on a Tuesday breakdown. It's been a couple weeks, and so I have a lot to talk about in this half hour we have today. But if you jump on and you want to leave some comments, leave some comments. It is Tuesday, May 9th, and I was on vacation last week, and the week before I was at a conference. So here I am for the first time in 3 weeks. What happened in the last 3 weeks? Well, let's see. We had Daniel 12. We finished the book Daniel. That was good. And then we had a Super Sunday where we talked about Lazarus, and that was great. And then last Sunday, we had Pastor James talk on the bread of life. So I'm going to do my best to recap all that. And also, we had a congregational meeting in the middle of all that. That bears some conversation today in my confessional box. So where do we start? Let's start with... I don't remember much about Daniel 12, but let's start there. Wanted to wrap up that series. Daniel 12 is a great passage where the angel is talking to Daniel about the end of the world and the resurrection of everybody and the separation of those whose names are written in the book of life versus those whose names are not written in the book of life. And then there's this hovering figure over the river. There's an angel on each bank of the river, and then there's this hovering man in linen that showed up in chapter 10, and then he shows up again in chapter 12, and he says some more stuff. And of course, the question is that Jesus? Or is it another angel? It's probably Jesus, I would think. But then, of course, the question becomes, with what he says, what do we make of that? And it's interesting that after he talks, Daniel says, I didn't understand that. And the angel's like, yeah, just go home. It's not for you to understand, Daniel. You'll know it when you see it. The people who you write this for, as you seal up this prophecy, they will know it when they see it. And seal up the prophecy is another phrase. It came up a couple times, and I didn't have time to really dig into it in the sermons, but I mentioned it in passing. It doesn't mean make it secret and hide it. It means finish the letter and put your signature on it, to seal it. So you got to think like, again, ancient cultures of sealing scrolls with the little wax strip and the signet ring that says this is from King so-and-so, open on penalty of death kind of thing. So to seal up the prophecy is to say, finish the letter, finish the scroll, and then put your Daniel signet on it. We're done. We're done here. Seal it up. And so it's not that we're not going to tell you and we're going to keep it secret. This is all the information you're going to get. And the people who get it will know it when they see it. So that's kind of chapter 12. And then at the end, you have the crazy, there's a time, times, and half a time. That's what the floating man says, hovering man says. And Daniel's like, what does that mean? When will this be accomplished? And the angel's like, go home. We're done here. But you're good, Daniel. Your name is in the book of life. You are honored. You are good. Blessed are those. The time, times, and half time is at 3.5 years. If it is, that's 1,260 days or 42 months, which both show up in Revelation. But then at the end, it says 1,290 days, and blessed is the one who makes it to the 1,335 days. And that's how the book ends. And you're left scratching your head. Nowhere else in the Bible is 1,290 days mentioned. It's always 1,260 if it's 3.5. And 1,335, what in the world is that? Well, it's 45 days after the other day, which is 30 days after the other days. And there are people with the index cards in their basement and the yarn that want to do it all. And you can find charts online, people who have definitively solved Daniel 12. And you know what? Maybe they're right. But I struggle with the definitively part of any of this. And I hope I communicated that effectively in the Daniel stuff. You are free, and I hope you do. You're free to study this to your heart's content and come up with whatever chart you want to come up with, or believe somebody's chart that's out there. I am okay with the solutions that people have come up with. What I am not okay with is the definitive part of, I have solved it once and for all. No, you haven't. You just haven't. And so for the free church, end times, called eschatology, the position is a secondary issue, not a primary issue. Now, for some people, they want to make it a primary issue. We don't, and I don't. And if you do, I think you're wrong. Even if I agree with your position, if it is a primary issue that you have solved for everyone else, and anyone who disagrees with you is wrong and heretic, immediately I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to listen to you, because this is the one thing Jesus said we can't know, is the date of his return. So why do we waste so much time trying to figure it out? But it is worth talking about, it's worth studying, and I hope we got that out of the book of Daniel, that the study of it is worth our time and teaches us a lot about how we should live in our current era and what to look forward to and to hope for, but to keep it as open-handed as possible. And so if you read a book that's convincing to you, great. Pursue that and ask good questions. So that's Daniel. The other thing I really enjoyed finding for myself that I put into the sermon was how Daniel 12 specifically, and maybe Daniel generally as a book, really connects with Jesus' parable of the weed and the wheat. The weeds and the wheat, and this whole idea of how do we live in our current age? Aren't we supposed to be out pulling weeds and fighting evil and we are called to be people of influence. We're going to talk about that this Sunday with Light of the World. Jesus is the light of the world, and we are the light on the hill as a church. But this idea of, isn't it our job as wheat to pull all the weeds? And very clearly in that parable, the answer is no. When you see weeds in the field, don't freak out. That's normal. The enemy has sown those weeds in and among the wheat. And you say, well, where are the weeds and wheat? In this metaphor, in this parable, is that the church? Is that my family? Well, Jesus explains it very, very clearly at the end of the parable. He says, the field is the world. Okay, so when you, if you're a follower of Jesus, i.e. wheat, come across weeds, that is, things that the enemy has sown to do evil, what should you do? That's the point of the parable. And the answer is wait. Because everything is going to grow up together. That is the way God has designed it. And then, at the end of all things, the angels will come in with their scythes, sickles, and they will harvest and separate. That's the deal. That's what that parable is clearly teaching, how the people of God should carry themselves when they're surrounded by weeds. And the answer is, don't pull weeds, you might harm the wheat. Just wait. And that's hard for us. That doesn't fit the battleship mentality that a lot of Christians have. And, of course, we are in a political environment and in a political system unique to all of human history where we do have a say. And does that mean we shouldn't say anything, or we shouldn't do our due diligence as a citizen to bring about a better society? No, of course we should do those things. But that's different than the battleship mentality of Christians that says we have to pull weeds. And Daniel, again, this whole exile principle, and even the pursuit of the end times doctrine of just wait. It's hard to wait. But in the end, God is going to bring about the comeuppance, the justice, as well as the mercy that we are hungry for. And so anyway, I wasn't expecting that parable to overlay so cleanly on everything we had covered in Daniel. So when the Spirit brought that to mind, or when I realized it, or I'll give him the credit because I don't really think I'm that smart or creative. When he brought that to mind, and I realized, yeah, that's a great bow to tie on the whole Daniel series. So I remember doing that, and that was fun a couple weeks ago. Then we had Lazarus on Dia de los Niños for our Super Sunday. And it really was what we said on that Sunday, if you were here. Ali and I were talking at the conference we were at that Tuesday, so 2 weeks ago. What do you want to talk about in the sermon this Sunday? Because we were done with the Daniel series. We weren't going to start the I Am series yet. And it was a nice open freedom thing. And we do this occasionally. It's like we can talk about anything. So like last year in the summer when we did the backyard service under the tent, we did John 1. And why did we do John 1? Because we both thought that would be fun. And so this year is the same kind of thing. And I said, let's pick a kid's Bible story that often gets taught in Sunday school to kids because it's the day of the child. And maybe it's new for people, or they'll hear a story in adult church as if they're still in kids' church, and we'll have fun with that. And he picked Lazarus, just the first thing that came to his mind. And I joked with him. I'm like, oh, that's funny because you always make fun of yourself for being short. We should totally do that. But let's keep thinking about it. And then we went through the whole conference, and our minds are focused on what the conference speaker's sharing and all these other free church connections we have. And actually, they asked Ali and I to present to the conference our relationship and how Grace Latino has been working so well within the Grace Church umbrella, and how we're one church and not two separate churches. And so we got to present on that. Anyway, and then he was getting news about his father-in-law's health. So after the conference, I get in here on that Thursday. And on my desk are his notes for a sermon on Lazarus that he did on Wednesday without telling us. Oh, I'm saying Lazarus over and over and over. And Marcia, thank you for putting me right. Zacchaeus, not Lazarus. What's wrong with me? I just came back from vacation. Oh my goodness. Zacchaeus was the little man. Lazarus was not Zacchaeus. Whew. I've been doing that for like 5 minutes, haven't I? Thank you so much, Marcia. By the way, if I ever do that on a Sunday from the pulpit, feel free to shout out too, because once your brain gets going. Yeah, Zacchaeus is what we talked about, not Lazarus. Totally different guys. But anyway, so I came in on that Thursday, and he had his notes on the Zacchaeus passage. And so it's like, great. And that was it. So we had fun with it, and all credit to Ali on that. But then what happened that Sunday morning was the news came that morning that Anna's dad had passed away, which was heartrending and heartbreaking for everybody. And it certainly cast a pall on the Super Sunday we're with Grace Latino together. And Eileen, I think, heard the news between the two services. So she translated the first service, but couldn't do the second for obvious reasons. And I even told Ali, like, if you and the whole family need to go, I can make the service happen with or without a translator. But Ali decided to stay, and we brought Daphne, who had been playing bass with the worship team, who's bilingual as well, and she did the second service. So Eileen and Anna and the rest of the family could go home. And of course, it made for the big celebration after in the back for Dia de los Niños, a little weird. But that was still a lot of fun. It's just everybody was concerned about Anna and Ali and the kids and just the challenges there. So it was a unique Sunday. Of all the Sundays to have that happen, to have it happen when the two congregations are together. On the one hand, I felt like our church responded really well to surround the Perez family with love and care, but also it made, when you plan the whole thing around Ali and I being together, with Eileen doing translation, and of course Anna being such a key leader at Grace Latino, it happens. And I thought we handled it really well, but at the same time, it's not a Super Sunday I'm going to remember super fondly. I'm going to remember it with a heavy heart. But I thought the Zacchaeus sermon was, again, deeper than I was expecting. Because I know the Zacchaeus story. It's in Luke. It's about this many verses. And I thought, well, wait a minute. In context, what comes after that, Jesus immediately starts telling this parable of the minas, which is all about what are you doing with the resources God's given you, which absolutely has to be a Zacchaeus connection, because Zacchaeus is responding to his salvation by taking his resources and doing something with them. But then I also thought it is connected to the passage before Zacchaeus, which is the blind beggar on the road into Jericho, because you can't get further apart socioeconomically from Zacchaeus to this blind beggar. And they're the two characters that Luke tells us Jesus stopped the train to talk to in Jericho on his way to his crucifixion. So I tried to bring that out, and yeah, it was a better Zacchaeus sermon than I wrote. And I think part of it is because Ali wrote most of it, and the Holy Spirit took hold of it for us. So that was good. And then this last Sunday, Pastor James introduced our I Am series. And we're going to have a variety of preachers for this series because we're hitting the summer months and people are going to be traveling, and I'm going to be on another family vacation. Just so you know, this last week, I took my son Micah, and we just went up to Breckenridge and just kind of I needed a break. I needed a break week, just a come down week. So it wasn't like we traveled far or did a whole lot of stuff. It was just a couple days up in Breckenridge. And then from there, went to Grand Junction to see my daughter's senior performance for her degree, her musical theater degree. She graduates in 3 weeks. In 2 weeks. Yee. But we went out there. So it was kind of a Colorado little trip. And in June, we're taking 2 weeks as a whole family to travel across the country. So, but with that, you have different guest speakers. And I know all of our pastors are exceptional preachers and are good go-to people. But James is one of those guys. He's a processor. He'll tell you he takes a long time to think through things, which I appreciate that he brings that to our team. But if I asked Gino or John or my dad to preach and gave them a couple days, they'd knock it out. And I think James could too, but because I know James so well, I need to ask him like 6 weeks ahead of time so that he can process it all. But I watched the sermon and I just thought, man, he seems so comfortable up there, doesn't he? He only preaches about once a year, maybe twice, because he is busy teaching our kids every Sunday. But he looked so comfortable up there and he did such a great job. And I told him this morning, what I really appreciated is he didn't get lost in the weeds that I would have gotten lost in on this passage. And what I mean by that is he correctly connected the bread of life to the feeding of the 5,000, because that's exactly why the conversation happened. Was the people met him on the other side of the lake, and he's like, you're just here because I gave you free food last time, but I'm here to tell you I'm giving you me, which is eternal food, not just the free food that you think you're here for. And so if you don't do bread of life in the context of the feeding of 5,000, you're missing the point of bread of life. But I would have done a different angle, and it probably would not have been as good. I think it assuredly would not have been as good as what James gave. Because in church history, one of the major controversies for 2,000 years has been John 6. If you don't eat my flesh and drink my blood, you can have no part of me. The people left because this was a hard saying. This is a massive controversy between Catholics and Protestants on whether or not communion is literally the body and blood of Jesus or a symbolic, not sacrament, but ordinance. And I mean, it's a debate that has raged for centuries, and I know very clearly what I think about it, but I'm not necessarily going to solve it for everybody. But I would struggle to preach John 6 and not bring that into play, because it's a topic I've gone to the deep end on. I've had so many conversations on with people. And in the Catholic perspective, they tie it to the I'm the bread of life. That statement not only connects to the feeding of 5,000, but everything else that comes after in John 6, which is this hard teaching that sounds like cannibalism that the Catholic Church and the early church turned into. Yes, his body and blood are made manifest in this sacrament, and it provides saving grace when we do this. And the Protestants would say, no, there's no saving grace in it. And we're not quite sure how much of his body and blood are literally in this. And some denominations came out of Protestantism saying, okay, yeah, it is, but it doesn't save us because we're not saved by works, we're saved by grace. And if you have to take communion, now you're doing a work to be saved, and we're not going to draw that line. But there is a manifestation of the Lord present in communion. And other denominations are like, no, it's strictly symbolic, because the Last Supper was Passover. It was a Passover meal, which is a meal designed to be symbolic, where the food represents this and the wine represents that. And, so if he instituted communion at a meal that is symbolic of a story, isn't communion then symbolic of a story? He is just fulfilling. No, the bread is not symbolic of our fathers wandering in the wilderness. The bread is symbolic of Jesus' body. Whereas the Catholics would be like, no, when he said this is my body, he meant this is my body. And I would say in response, well, no, when he said that, he still had a body. And when he handed out the wine, his blood was still in his veins. So clearly he's taking the symbolism of Passover and saying, no, this is really about me, not about that. So make it about me now every time you take this. So I view it as symbols that do not confer saving grace. And the Catholic then would say, well, what about John 6? If he didn't mean literal cannibalism, why would they leave? Because it was such a hard teaching. And the answer to that is at the end of John 6, where it says, the spirit gives life, the flesh accounts for nothing. And they didn't understand the metaphor, but it was a metaphor. He's not, we'll see later, he's not literally a gate. It's a metaphor for letting the sheep into the kingdom. But this is the debate. Is it a literal, he is the bread of life, i.e. when you take communion, you are eating his life and receiving life from him? Or is it a metaphor that he is the manna now given from the Father to provide spiritual sustenance to all who come and unite with him, i.e. eat him? And like I just said, that is a massive piece to this theological concept of I'm the bread of life that I absolutely would have worked into the sermon. And I think James's sermon was better because he didn't, and it wasn't necessary. And now I've just wasted 6 minutes of your life talking about it. Wasted, I don't know. But this is a better avenue to have that conversation than the sermon on Sunday, which really does primarily connect to the feeding of the 5,000. The conversation after is more on statements he made after I'm the bread of life. And like I said, I would have gotten lost in the weeds, and James didn't because he is a smart man. So yeah, that's that. Business meeting happened last Sunday. It was kind of the last thing I did before I hit the road. If you weren't there, we approved the budget, the missions budget. We welcomed in 31 new members, and we approved a special project of doing some rebuilding upstairs of where I'm sitting right now, which is our youth room, which is just not capable of housing our youth ministry right now. And it needs not just a facelift, it needs some structural things changed. And so we put forth the plan and got some good feedback on that and good discussion, but the congregation approved and affirmed to go ahead on that, which we will be doing this summer, which is fun. But it did bring about, it's something I wanted to talk about here in this video, the philosophy of how these decisions get made. Because one of the questions that came up, whenever you introduce a project, you have to introduce it to everybody. One of the things that's a couple people said, well, this is the first I'm hearing about it. And that's fair, especially when you're asking for them to vote on a big financial package and they want to know more details. At the same time, we do our best to communicate ahead of time and to drip things in so that people aren't hearing about it for the first time when they're being asked to make a decision about it, because that's not ideal. But at the same time, everybody has to hear about it for the first time. And sometimes what happens in the life of a church happens abruptly, or there is a time frame that is not ideal, that the purpose of gathering as a congregation is to introduce ideas to people. So if the first time you hear something is at a congregational meeting, that's okay, because that's why you have congregational meetings. The problem, I understand it, is if it's the first time you're hearing it and then we're asking you to vote on it, that can be, you can say, no, I need more time to digest this. And that's fair, because the elders have had time to digest it. And the staff has talked about it, or the people who are in the loop, or like the Hamilton song, right, in the room where it happens, have already asked all these questions. And we've already thought about it, but that means we've had time to ask these questions and thought about it. And sometimes in a congregational meeting, the member who hears about this doesn't have that time. And I think it's fair to say that's not fair. So that's one of the things that came out of that, and that's why our elders try to do due diligence, and we pastors for sure as well, to follow up with anybody and to not rush it. Because again, in the old way of doing it, when it was Robert's Rules of Order, if you lose the vote, you just go home mad and it gets done anyway, and you don't get any follow-up, you don't get any satisfaction. You were in the 49%. Sorry, we're going to do this, and now we've told you. And I know for a fact the elders don't want to do that. We want it to be a congregational participation thing. Does that mean everybody's going to buy in? No, you can never get 100% buy-in on any decision. Hopefully you can get it on decisions like we're going to preach the gospel. But in terms of facilities and building and how do we spend money and how do we save money, and 100%, if we get it, is a miracle. So we're not looking for complete and total unanimity, but the affirmation model is there so that where there isn't, there's still family relationships and conversations that happen. So that even if something gets decided that you don't fully unequivocally agree with, the phrasing is, can you live with it and support it? And if you can't, then you'll get a follow-up conversation so we can find out why not. And so that's really the way the process works. And I thought it worked really, really well at the meeting that way. And in particular, this youth room build, it was interesting because there's a policy on our books. This predates me. This goes back years and years and years. That if the finance team, that the finance team can approve a project up to 10% of the annual budget in cost, and that doesn't require a congregational vote. So anything up to 10% of the annual budget, which for round numbers, let's say is $1 million. It's higher than that, but let's say it's $1 million. So anything up to $100,000, the finance team can approve, and we don't need a congregational vote according to the policies that are on the plate. And by we, I mean the church. I'm not on the finance team. I don't want to be on the finance team. I have nothing to do with that. But they can approve that. And so with a $70,000 project, we talked about it as a leadership team that, well, we have the policy on the books to say we can just do this. We can sign the contracts to get that work done, and the congregation will find out when they see the dust. Or we can announce it on a Sunday, hey, we're doing this, just so you know, FYI. But we thought, no, that if we're really a family and our congregational meeting is our family gathering in the living room to talk family business, let's bring this to the congregation. Let's let the congregation essentially vote on this and decide if they agree this is where we want to go, because we think this is where we want to go. So it was a really interesting dynamic, knowing that, I mean, this is just my brain. I'm not speaking for the elders here. I'm not speaking for anyone else. This is just my brain on that Sunday night, knowing we're doing this to better communicate to the congregation and so that they can be a part of this. We don't have to do this according to policy, but we want to do this according to philosophy and according to our values of relational connection. To hear some of the hands raised say, why aren't you bringing this to us? Seemed a little weird, but it wasn't exactly a dynamic where I could stand up and say, like, how would it have sounded like, well, we don't have to, so deal with it. Like, be thankful. Like that's dumb. That's not where my heart was either. But it's just that those dynamics come into play in church business stuff. And I just want to say, some days it's hard, but I do appreciate when people who have served faithfully, and again, this is Pastor Think, they've earned the right by being members, by being faithful members. And so when all that happens, there's a part of me that just is like, I have pastor PTSD, and I'm just like, oh, why did I go to all those meetings if now I have to go through it all over again? But at the same time, I love that we have a structure where people aren't silenced, where people who have those legitimate questions have a place to ask them. and they get treated with honor and respect because they ought to. And it's not a perfect system. There's no perfect system, but I had to come to grips with that went really, really well. And so thanks to everybody who participated and everybody who asked a question and everybody who pushed back. I've heard it said that a good leader surrounds himself with people who are smarter than him. And a great leader is someone who surrounds himself with people who are smarter than him who disagree with him. And so when you establish the trust factor in the mutual honor society, you can ask hard questions and disagree agreeably. And it doesn't stifle unity. And I love that about our church. And so thank you to anyone who participated, and to the elders who led it, and the finance team who put together that budget, and the mission team who put together their budget. And I left on my vacation feeling tired and burned out and frustrated, but also very honored and glad that this is the church I get to be a pastor of, because you guys are all awesome. And now that it's 31 minutes and 15 seconds, thank you, Marcia, for reminding me Zacchaeus and Lazarus are two different people. You are awesome if you are watching this live, and I want you to know that. And if you watch this later, you are also awesome, and I want you to know that. And if you never watch this, you're awesome, and I hope somebody someday tells you. Thanks. And now we're done.